Welcome to the last day of our Asia-Pacific Forest Governance Forum. We'd like to thank all those that have joined us over the past 3 days and also welcome any new participants for today's session. Today's session is going to be longer than the other 3 sessions that we've had. It's going to be running for about 3 hours. We have a normal technical session that is going to look at making the difference for the coming decade, and also looking at how we can sustain some of the change that has happened over the past 10 years or so in improving forest governance. After that, we then have a closing session that will comprise a closing panel. So a number of key speakers or panelists that will be looking at the future, reflecting on what we've covered over the past 3 days, and also reflecting on what that means for the future. So before we start the formal session for today, I have a few things to highlight, just a reminder about why we are here today. As I've already explained, the Forest Governance Forum is part of a bigger project that is working in 4 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And the main purpose of the project is to empower and enhance the involvement of non-state actors, mostly civil society and communities in forest monitoring, nature conservation, and engaging in policy processes at important forest landscapes in the region and within their countries. The main outputs of the project are around increasing capacity, increasing transparency, and also creating viable, constructive and sustainable networks of well-informed non-state actors, and also ensuring that they are informed and ensuring that they are also effectively engaging and participating in forest policy processes. In terms of today's session, we'd like as much as possible to encourage you to participate in the discussions using social media, but most importantly, we want you to ask any questions that you might have to our speakers today. And please use the Q&A function that Zoom provides instead of the chat for any specific questions that you might have for the speakers. And if you could, try as much as possible to direct those questions to specific speakers. We're also going to provide simultaneous interpretation, which is available in French and Indonesian. There's an interpretation function also at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and please select the language that is suitable for you. Just to make you aware, we're going to have one presentation today, which will be in French. So if you have not been using the interpretation function all along, you might want to use it during today's session when we have a presentation from some of our colleagues who will be presenting from Yaoundé in Cameroon. Without wasting much time, I would like to hand over to our chair today, Christy, who will introduce herself and also introduce our excellent lineup of speakers for today's session. Thank you very much. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Home, for inviting me here. Thank you to all the support group that's making this possible. Welcome to this last session in the Asia-Pacific Forest Governance Forum, focusing on making a difference for the coming decade, sustaining change and maintaining the momentum to meet the challenge. We have in this session 5 presentations. 2 of them will be jointly made by 2 presenters from the Central African continent. Then we will have 2 from the region and 1 global presentation. Just a gentle reminder to the presenters to please respect the time. You only have 15 minutes per presentation. If and when you go over time, you will be taking away time from the Q&A session. And I hope you agree that this session, looking forward to the next decade, the voice of those not presenting are as important as those presenting. So would really encourage all the presenters to be mindful of the time. I will remind you when you have 2 minutes left in the presentation. Those of you, we have a presentation from 2 people from, this is a joint presentation from Professor Aurelian Sibine from CIDT, University of Wolverhampton, Professor, sorry if I mispronounce your name, and Theodil Quincho from World Resources Institute. This is a combination of an academic and a civil society presentation with experience from, you know, over 2 decades of experience in both the academe and
I think we've lost Christy off the line, so perhaps we can go over to Aurelian for his and Theodil for their presentation.
Thank you very much, Danny and Christy for the introduction. This presentation is a joint exercise with my colleague Theodil Quincho, who is a country director or country manager at World Resources Institute in the Republic of Congo. And as it was introduced, this work emerges from work that we've been doing in the Congo Basin, supporting independent forest monitoring organizations and those involved in the monitoring of illegal wildlife trafficking. So briefly, we'll talk about the issue that we're trying to address in this piece of presentation, and then we'll focus on the forest governance intervention that we want to look at, which is independent forest monitoring. And then we'll highlight the framework that we use to carry out this research, and then we'll talk about the findings and then the conclusions. Well, really not to take a lot of your time, I think much has been said during this week about the issues around forest illegality and wildlife trafficking and the negative consequences that these activities have on the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. And if we look at the issues around illegal timber industry, for instance, it's well known and documented that 90% of tropical deforestation is linked to this industry. And if you added the trade in illegal wildlife products, which is valued at about $20 billion annually, you can see that really jointly these industries are really have negative impacts, you know, globally and in the countries where these resources are being extracted from. I think critically looking at those impacts, and I think we are now, you know, experiencing with the COVID-19 pandemic and others that have happened before this one, the fact that as illegality expands into forest areas, that is also changing the dynamics in terms of bringing more humans into contact with wildlife and infectious diseases. And, you know, it's established that about 95% of newly emerging zoonoses, you know, are derived from deforestation or trade in illegally harvested products. And really, we're looking here at crimes that really trap states in a vicious cycle where, you know, as they're losing money because of illegality, that also means that there's less resources for them to actually enforce the management of the natural resources. Next, please. So really, I think faced with these issues, and a lot of it, and this was raised also in the first high-level panel, that a lot of it has been blamed on corruption, but I think it is well known that weak institutions and rules-based systems, and also the weak capacities of governments to enforce legislation has led to the governance, to the failures that we've observed in the area of forest management. So critically, I think in the 90s, obviously, you know, there were calls in the face of government led forestry, you know, the failings that were observed. There were calls for the need for other stakeholders to get involved. And this was really influenced at the time by the publication by Ostrom, you know, looking at governing the commons in 1990. And, you know, some of the proponents of the forest governance agenda were really arguing that we should have like the retreat of the state or the hollowing out of the state, as other actors highlighted, suggesting that markets and, you know, civil society were, let me say, with the assumption, more capable of managing the commons than governments had actually done. But also other proponents were arguing that maybe the state will play or become a more equal actor in the management of forest. And so this led effectively to emergence of different forest governance arrangements. You know, we've seen forest certification, public-private partnerships, and very recently, independent forest monitoring, which emerged in the 1990s as well, particularly looking at the work from Global Witness in Cambodia at the time. But what we've seen, if we look at the work that's been done around forest governance, compare that with what is happening around the monitoring of wildlife trafficking, we find that in the area of wildlife, we have these large international conservation agencies, you know, the likes of the WWF, IUCN, and others. But in the middle, you have that hollow middle where you do not really have strong engagement of local non-governmental organizations. And we are speaking here particularly of the Congo Basin, where we've recently carried out a mapping study, and that is what is emerging. So we were arguing that really there's really much less theorization of the role of non-governmental organizations. But when we look at the area of independent forest monitoring, historically, a lot of the work has focused on, you know, large international agencies, Global Witness, you know, in the past, resource extraction monitoring and others. And as local NGOs in the Congo Basin have got involved in this area, we find that there's much less research. And, you know, my colleague and myself, Richard, we've been trying to question to say, look, how can we strengthen the effectiveness of this new governance model, particularly independent forest monitoring? Next, please. And, you know, just for information and, you know, still drawing on the earlier works, you know, based on the work of international organizations, you know, Tech Mayer here defined independent forest monitoring, really looking at the third-party assessment of the conformity of, you know, forest management, the way in which the national legislations are being implemented and enforced. But then the Pan-African Network for Independent Forest Monitoring Organizations, which is going to make a presentation earlier, have expanded this definition to argue that some of these definitions can happen, but go beyond the relationship with state, that, you know, independent forest monitoring can happen without necessarily having authorization from the state to do so. And so this has actually developed into different types of independent forest monitoring. So briefly, you know, when we talk about independent forest monitoring, it's really about these non-governmental organizations, you know, going to the field, carrying out investigations, writing up reports, and submitting these reports to different decision-making authorities. And we argue, Theodil and myself, in this reflection, that the traditional role of just writing a mission report and submitting it to the forest administration is obsolete, and that NGOs have to do more than just submit reports. Next slide, please. So to go about this work, drawing also from work that we've done in the past, we're looking at what types of frameworks we could use to assess the relationships that these civil society organizations have with the state. And we found one of these frameworks, which is called the 4C framework, which basically looks at the way in which governments interact with NGOs, particularly looking at the ways in which they interact, looking at the resources that they have, but also the goals that they are trying to achieve. So our objective, really looking at the Congo Basin NGOs, was first of all to map out the relationships that these NGOs have with governments, but also what types of tactics do these organizations use to bring about responses from governments as they try to influence the governance of forest resources in the region where they work. Next, please. And so to go about this, we drew on our own work, 2 projects that have been funded by the European Union and DFID, now FCDO, looking at strengthening forest monitoring and wildlife law enforcement, but also a lot of the interviews that we did with leaders emerging from the Pan-African Network of Independent Forest Monitoring Organizations. And what we found really were these 4 main relationships that exist between non-governmental organizations and governments. And we found that complementarity was the most important type of relationship which emerged, where we had a common objectives between governments and civil society organizations, all trying to work together to improve transparency, accountability, and law enforcement. And we've seen this particularly within the FLECT agenda and RED+, but also other land use change processes that have emerged in the Congo Basin, where governments are trying to do their part, civil society trying to do their part, and to complement each other in achieving the broader goals of improving transparency and accountability. We've also seen complementarity in the areas of resource exchange, funding, sometimes NGOs funding some activities of government and vice versa, and also exchanging expertise and knowledge. We've also seen complementarity here because in the Congo Basin, some NGOs have actually agreements with governments to actually carry out their monitoring. And clearly, we understand that this is because governments see the benefits of these NGOs carrying out this independent function. But some of the quotes that you see there begin to highlight other types of nuances that emerge within this framework of complementarity. And then if you see the first one from Gabon, where the NGO there is saying, look, our approach is to help government provide information, but if they don't do anything, we're just simply going to denounce the illegalities that we are identifying. Next step, next slide, please.
Aurelian, you have 2 minutes left.
Yes, please. I think I got for Christy. I think I was timing myself. So really, so as these NGOs try to help and support government, they have to strengthen their professionalism in terms of enhancing their credibility. But sometimes when things don't work out, they have to engage with media and international agencies. So as these NGOs try to engage with government, we also find situations of confrontation where there's really competition and governments and NGOs don't agree on what is happening. And we've seen in some countries where we work that where the NGOs have agreements with the government sometimes will refuse to give them a mandate to actually go to the field. And of course, the issues around corruption emerge because governments collect payments illegally from forest exploitation companies, and there's a lot of conflict of interest with some agencies in government actually involve themselves in the illegal activities on the ground. Next slide, please. So the next type of relationship is that of instrumentalization, where we find that NGOs try to influence the government, and also governments trying to influence the NGOs, each of them trying to position themselves and foster their own narrative. And the key finding is that the NGOs that are actually successful in delivering results and impact are those that have a clear strategy, a clear theory of change, and clear influencing strategies, but most importantly, they also have a diversified funding base. So interestingly, we also found a very weak, in terms of responses, cooperation as a type of a relationship. But where we found this particularly in Central African Republic and in Congo, where some respondents were asking whether these organizations were too close to government, considering that even though there were reports that were being generated, there was really no sanctions that were emerging from this work. So, and in these two countries, we actually found that these NGOs were being pushed to change the way in which they work. And in Central African Republic, actually through our project, we helped put in place a multi-stakeholder forest and environmental crime working group to try and push government to actually act on the recommendations that were emerging from the civil society work. So really to conclude, we argue that really, yes, independent forest monitoring is a good forest governance intervention, but it has strong potential, to improve accountability, voice, transparency, and all of that. But that really NGOs must not be reactive. They have to manage this relationship that exists between themselves and the government. But often we see that these NGOs are often reactive in their actions, which means that they're sometimes and in many cases wrong-footed by government agencies. And so to be successful, they must develop IFM strategies, influencing strategies, strengthen their financing in terms of the diversification of funding resources, so as to strengthen the ability to hold the government to account. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation.
Thanks, Aurelian. Let me go to the next presenter. I think it's going to be Bryna Griffin from the head of Forest Program at BirdLife International.
Thanks everyone for joining. So what we want to talk about is actually taking it in a slightly different direction. So I'm going to be speaking about something that we started at BirdLife called the Forest Landscape Sustainability Accelerator. And this is really addressing an interest and a need from a lot of organizations and communities working in forests to try to access sustainable finance. And so you can go to the next slide. So just to give a little bit of context, many of you, especially if you work in conservation or if you work in finance or if you work in the public sector and government, you may be hearing in the media and in sort of conservation circles a lot about the growth of private finance in conservation. So banks and other companies committing large amounts of money to impact investing or green investing or conservation finance. And so, you know, it seems to a lot of people that this is a major opportunity to keep conservation going and to shift the way that we fund conservation from just getting grants and small grants to something more sustainable. But what we found is that it's actually quite difficult for a lot of organizations, particularly NGOs and community-based organizations, to figure out how to access these funds. And so within BirdLife, we wanted to try a different approach to try and support our partners. We have, as many of you know, about 112 partners around the world at the moment. And many of these organizations are working on forest finance. So we wanted to help them figure out how to get access to these new types of finance. So we launched the Accelerator in order to help, as I said, help our teams incorporate business and finance approaches, as well as what's called the landscape approach, into the work that they do in our BirdLife tropical forest landscapes. So the places where they're working on the ground with communities, with government officials to monitor and protect and conserve forests, we wanted to help them kind of figure out what opportunities they had to access these new types of finance. So one important thing to note, because you see a lot of these big commitments for large amounts of money, and many of them are coming from the point of view that we can invest in green solutions and make a lot of profit, and all of these, you know, opportunities are out there just waiting for finance. And so it's important to consider that most of the projects that at least we work with are actually starting with the challenge of solving a very local problem. So a localized deforestation driver. And we think this is a valid approach because building a local enterprise or a local solution to solve a local problem makes a lot of sense. But it means that there are inherent limitations in the work that they're doing. And that's what makes it so difficult to figure out how then to access these large finance opportunities. So some of those limitations, and I'll talk about these more in a minute, are that these are often very high risk. They're very, very small scale often, especially initially. And so this means they're often not considered bankable by the finance sector. So we needed, as I said, to fill a niche for our teams. And that really focused on how we build entrepreneurial capacity, how we provide technical capacity on these new types of finance and new approaches, and to be able to provide some funding that is flexible and risk tolerant. So we created, and again, I just want to stress that at the moment, this accelerator is just internal to BirdLife, but we're sharing it because we think it's an interesting model and we've actually had quite a bit of success. So we wanted to share how we've actually done this, what we do, and maybe provide some inspiration for other organizations looking to do something similar. So we focus on 4 important components, and these are actually things that we designed based on the concept of an accelerator from the tech sector. So if you look at the startup and tech sector all around the world, in Silicon Valley or in Berlin or wherever you may be, in Singapore, there are many, many accelerators, and they often have similar approaches, and even when they're working with companies rather than NGOs. So we focus on collaboration. So we want the participants in the accelerator to share knowledge, both amongst themselves, as well as across other parts of BirdLife and beyond BirdLife. We focus on seed grants. So these aren't huge grants, but we're providing what we can in terms of small but very flexible funding to allow the participants to use that funding in whatever way they really need to in order to explore these opportunities and explore the finance approaches and to test new strategies, which is important because we're kind of okay if we test something and it doesn't work, which is pretty rare when it comes to donor funding. And we also focus a lot on training. So we do a combination of workshops where we bring everyone together or subgroups together, but we also provide one-on-one customized technical support and training. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it's a really important part that we added more recently and have found really helpful. And we also provide and work on profile raising, because one of the most important things is that, especially for some of these projects that are quite small, it's important that people hear about them and people learn about what they're doing. And that's how we can attract more funding and more support. So we focus on communications and external profile raising. So this is a map of our sort of cohort at the moment. We're going into our third cohort, which we're hoping to select before the end of this year. And we include a whole number of, these are all BirdLife partners on the right-hand side that you can see, BirdLife partners around the world who either have already participated in the Accelerator or we're hoping to accept applications and proposals to participate in the coming year. So it's a very good spread. It's a very diverse set of organizations, and each one has its own focus, strategies, its own sort of capacity, strengths, and weaknesses. And so it's important that the Accelerator is really flexible in order to meet their needs. So just a couple of examples. So one example I wanted to highlight is actually in Paraguay. So in this project, the partner in Paraguay, Guida Paraguay is the partner, is working on the development of a sustainable yerba mate agroforestry program with local communities. So yerba mate is a traditional tea crop that's grown under forest canopy. It can also be grown by cutting down all the trees and planting it in a plantation, much like you could do with cocoa or coffee. Or like cocoa or coffee, you can grow it in a much more ecologically friendly and biodiversity friendly way. So they're working with communities to focus on the biodiversity friendly type of yerba mate and providing incentives and support to do that. And they're basically essentially building a business with local communities to grow this type of yerba mate, to get it. They already have gotten it organic and fair trade certified. They already have purchase agreements with a US buyer. And now they're developing the actual business structure that will make it a standalone and sustainable business that can then accept finance. So this is what we want to focus on, is helping them with the business strategy and helping them develop that business so that then they can take on small scale finance and loans from impact investors. And they're also working, potentially now developing a joint initiative with a similar work with our partner in Argentina. So that's what the Accelerator is focusing on with them. Instead of focusing on the main part of conservation, we're focusing on the development of the sustainable business. And another example is from Cambodia. So in Cambodia, our BirdLife partner, which is just a brand new organization, is focused on supporting the conservation of a wildlife sanctuary, which is a government wildlife sanctuary, but they're doing so in collaboration with the communities and the government, of course. And so what we're developing there is a kind of two-pronged approach to financing this area in the long run. The first piece is rice. So we're working with a company that already exists, that was actually set up by the Wildlife Conservation Society, called Ibis Rice. And that is a company that has a system which enables farmers to commit to certain standards for conservation. So not expanding into the forest, not using certain pesticides. It's a wildlife friendly rice product that they're growing. And then in exchange, Ibis Rice markets that rice to an external market, particularly in Europe, but other parts of Asia, where it receives a high price. And so the farmers receive a benefit from doing conservation enterprise. So we're working to expand ibis rice into this landscape. And at the same time, we're also working on developing a RED project. And so these two approaches of the carbon finance and the rice project, which will incentivize and provide alternative livelihoods, or rather just improved livelihoods from an ecological point of view, those two things will work together and provide more sustainable finance in the long run for this landscape. So as an accelerator, we're supporting the partner to bring in, pilot, test the ibis rice system, as well as to develop the RED project itself in partnership with the government of Cambodia. You can go to the next slide, please.
Bryna, you have 2 minutes left.
Perfect. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of our lessons learned in the last 2 minutes. The first is that it's really important to remember that all of the enterprises that we work with, and probably many of the ones that you might work with, are seeking impact as the first priority. So it's important that we communicate that clearly, and that we communicate to potential donors and investors that that really is the focus. Also, it's one of the things that we found is that much of the conservation or the impact finance that we're seeing is going to things that are sort of less brown rather than really, really green, so to speak. So we're seeing a lot of sort of improved agriculture, which I just discussed, but it's still very, very difficult and very rare in the finance sector to find finance that's available for pure conservation. We haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. So that's something we're trying to figure out, but carbon seems to be one of the things that may offer an opportunity there. The other thing that we've found very difficult sometimes is to ensure equity. So understanding who owns the assets, how the communities and the NGOs can work with business in a way that's transparent and equitable, and to make sure that we're prioritizing the farmers and stakeholders and local governments, again, coming back to this impact before the returns and the profits of investors. There's nothing wrong with profits, but we need to make sure that we're being fair about how we develop these businesses so that the right people are benefiting first. And that's just going to make them more sustainable in the long run anyway. And as I said, one of our other challenges is that many of these projects are quite small. So it's very difficult in the short term for us to try and attract impact finance. So we really need to focus on building the business and strengthening the business first. And that might be through grants and other mechanisms before we can consider taking on finance. Next slide, please. This is the last slide, I think. So again, okay. So I just wanted to mention two things. One is, again, that it's important that we make sure we focus on the right finance and getting the right funding to the project. So not trying to jump ahead to conservation or impact finance when the projects and the enterprises aren't ready. So making sure that we have donors and funding that can support those businesses first. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the technical support. So in many finance organizations provide technical support in the form of more money, but actually many of the organizations that we get to know really need specialist consultants and specialist technical support. So being able to provide that from our team and from external consultants has actually made a huge difference, whereas just giving a bit more money may not have made that difference. So those are our lessons learned. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bryna. Aurelian in the first presentation covered how independence and the strength of CSOs is critical to influencing governments. And then Bryna went on to lessons learning from financing at the landscape scale in terms of monitoring on conservation. From the lessons from their accelerator model. We'll go on to hear from Anna Wong, a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Tropical Forestry, Universitas Malaysia, University Malaysia Sabah, UMS, chairperson of the Sabah branch of the Malaysian Nature Society. Anna?
welcome all of you to attend these forums. I represent Malaysian Nature Society. Would like to present to you this afternoon about the importance of multi-scale forest governance, our experience from MNS as a non-state actors in RIC+ developments and implementations in Malaysia. As per 2010, Malaysia's federal constitution, land and forests are state matters under the states. Federal government is responsible to provide guidance on forestry matters, followed by states' commitments to enact respective law and policy, such as Sabah have the Sabah Forestry Enactment, 1960 Acts, and others. A key challenge for forest government in all levels in Malaysia is to achieve a balance between economics, development, and conservation and sustainable use of forest resources. Several policy has been adapted here. The National Forestry Policy 1978 was formalized to conserve and manage forests through sustainable forest management. The National Forestry Act 1984, National Forest Law to administer, manage, and conserve forests and forestry-related development. The forest governance consists of policy structures, processes, and options at multiple scales, that is at national level, state level, local, and involve multiple actors, that is non-state actors, and a variety of institutions. Addressing sectoral and scala disconnects is key to improve forest governance in Malaysia to overcome any lack of policy coordinations and communication between the structures. So forested area in Peninsular Malaysia, that's, as you all know, Malaysia consists of Peninsular part and Sarawak and Sabah. Forested area in Peninsular Malaysia is managed by the Jabatan Perhutanan Semenanjung Malaysia, or JPSM. The area constitutes of permanent reserve forests, that is protection forests and production forests, and non-permanent reserve forests, wildlife forest park, and state lands forests. The key governance agency of forest governance is Sarawak, that is Forest Department Sarawak, and Sarawak Forestry Corporation, SFC. The forest land is classified into 3 categories: permanent forest estates, that is protected forests, forest reserve, and communal forests. The totally protected area, that is under national parks, wildlife sanctuary, and nature reserve, and the state land forests. The key government agency of forest governance in Sabah, that is under the Sabah Forestry Department, Sabah Wildlife Department, Sabah Parks, and Sabah Foundations. With a total of 3.8 million hectares, or 52% of Sabah lands, are forest reserve and other protected lands. The forest lands are divided into 27 forest management unit, or FMU, which comprise state lands and commercial forest reserve. Here, I would like to emphasize that Sabah totally protected areas comprise of Class 1 Protection Forest Reserve, Class 4 VJR, Class 7 Wildlife Forest Reserve, parks, wildlife sanctuary, and wildlife conservation areas. So as non-state actors can bridging the gaps between the national to local processes, institutions, and actors. In 2017, MNS and Trade Every Environment Special, TREES, conducted a roundtable discussion with non-state actors to gather information on current works of civil society organization in Central Forest Pine, CFS. MNS also engaged in various forest-related discussion, including on RIC+ readiness and development. The focus areas are Belum Temenggu Forest Complex in Central Forest Pines, also a key biodiversity area in Perak. The Hearts of Borneo, that is emphasis in Sabah and Sarawak. So we are actively participate in forest management and governance events. Forest Governance Jurong Workshop also organized by MNS. BirdLife International and MNS will publish a forest policy brief about multi-scala forest governance in Malaysia. So this is an example that we have the Forest Governance Jurong Workshop. In last year, 30th September, there was a forest certification practice and timber legality assurance systems implementation in Malaysia. Another one was conducted by Sabah branch by the name of Heart of Borneo Initiative Training Workshop for all the members and stakeholders. So MNS has been involved in policy advocacy and mobilization at the state and local level. In 2013, Sabah branch registered as a contributor to the Forest Watch portal to curb illegal and unsustainable deforestation. In 2017, participate in Forest Stewardship Council, Malaysia stakeholders meeting. Kuching and Miri branches in Sarawak are working closely with Sarawak Forestry Corporation to conserve local forests and sit as one of the key actors in the state's REAP Plus initiative. In 2019, MNS Kuching and SFC organized the Honorary Wildlife Ranger trainings. So MNS developed a National Forest Watch platform in order to access to up-to-date information on forest cover changes, fires, illegal logging, deforestation, and other threats. So REAP Plus as a multi-scala forest governance. In 2011, Malaysia had formal involvement in REAP Plus. 2017, National REAP Plus strategy was completed and adopted. The three key action areas to conserve forest sinks and biodiversity are as listed here. Coordination between federal and state government in addressing climate change and forest issue. Actions to reduce emissions and enhance sinks. Implement a sustainable financing mechanism. In year 2019, revised National Forest Reference Level, FRLs, was submitted. Results from the technical assessment by the UNFCCC. Although Malaysia is still an initial phase of REAP Plus readiness, the country see it as a viable option to address emission reductions and sink enhancement for international support. However, about $400 million would be required for the implementation to fulfill international commitment of maintaining at least 50% of forest cover. So in federal level, REAP Plus unit has been formed in the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, or KETSA, with the intention to monitor REAP Plus readiness and development. The National Steering Committee consists of state economic planning units, forestry department, and relevant federal ministries and agencies supported by the National Technical Committee on REAP Plus. So non-state actors are involved in the consultation processes throughout the REAP Plus readiness phase, both federal and state. MNS sits in the National Communication and Biannual Update Report National Steering Committee since 2014 to prepare reports to the NNFCCC. In 2014 to 2017, Sabah Forestry Departments, under the Sabah EU REAP Plus project, with the title Tackling Climate Change Through Sustainable Forest Management and Community Developments, to improve REAP Plus readiness and implementations via activity to strengthen community participation and partnership in forest protections, enhance benefits to the communities, address poor forest management. Sabah also developed REAP Plus roadmaps to promote and develop a sub-national REAP Plus strategy to transform land use for sustainable forest management. So subsequently, REAP Plus has been approved by the State's Cabinet and adopted in Sabah Forest Policy 2017 and Sabah Forest Enactment with Amendment number 2 in 2018. So for Central Forest Pine, as the backbone of Peninsular Malaysia ecological sensitive areas, is covering about 5.3 million hectares of areas cutting across 8 different states. So it is an ecological corridor that are able to reduce further fragmentations, allow wildlife movement across these fragmented area, and re-establish and restore connectivities. In 2007, Heart of Borneo initiative, which comprised of Malaysia, Sabah, and Sarawak, Indonesia, Kalimantan, and Brunei, whereby 2.1 million hectares of land forests the forest landscape in Sarawak, and 4 million hectares in Sabah. They are connected from Sabah through the link directly to Sarawak. This initiative working closely in Sabah EU READ Plus. So MNS participating in government and other party projects and influencing the policy processes. For example, Central Forest Pine, like Roundtable Central Forest Pines and others. And HLB Sabah and Sarawak is through the HLB conferences, forest certifications like MTCC, palm oil certification involved in MSPO, and also HECV technical working groups, EU biofuel and deforestation policies, EU READ and Flex VPA. So the key insight and learning from forest governance in Malaysia is we must focus more on the combined efforts, resources, and time in strengthening existing institutions, processes, and actors at national level, sub-national level, that is state level, and local to achieve improved forest governance. The efforts should focus on removing any potential barrier and gaps to mainstreaming and connecting forest governance efforts involving different states and non-state actors. National forest policy and law needs to in sync with global agreement and priorities, ensuring that forest governance implementation is guided by integral land use planning at landscape level, which is quite important. More needs to be done in terms of improvement of coordination and collaborations. MNS involvements and experience in forest policy processes, including READ Plus readiness and development, show that non-state actors can play a bridging role in addressing sectoral and scala gaps. Insights and learning from the implementation of forest governance project in Malaysia can be useful in a variety of contexts elsewhere.
Anna, you have 2 minutes left, yeah?
It's okay. So we'd like to acknowledge that EU initiative and funded regional project with the title Strengthening Non-State Actors Involvement in Forest Government in Indonesia, Malaysia, because Malaysia has been also one of it, and is led by the BirdLife International in partnership with Burung Indonesia, Harimau Foundation, MNS, Tengkel Conservation Alliance, Center for International Development and Training, and University of Papua New Guinea. Thank you. So all my reference. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna. Anna's presentation has zeroed in on how a strong civil society organization can actually be influencing policy and also participating in monitoring on the ground. And looking forward to greater collaboration and coordination. So we are now moving on. Just as a reminder, the next presentation will actually be in French. And so you have an interpretation button at the right hand in the bottom of the screen. So please use it, either Indonesian or English. So the presentation is by the Field Legality Advisory Group for, involving Horlin Jike, a lawyer, and Serge Mukori, a forestry engineer. It's a multidisciplinary presentation. So they will be presenting experiences again in the Congo Basin. And a regional experience. So I'm handing over to, I don't know who's going to go first, but Serge and Horlin, reminding you again that you have 15 minutes together to cover the presentation. So who's going to go first, Horlin or Serge? Serge, okay, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderator, for giving us the floor. Unfortunately, as I said, the presentation will be made in French and it is entitled Défis et opportunités pour les réseaux d'observation indépendante au niveau régional, le cas de la PAOI dans le bassin du Congo. La présentation va s'articuler essentiellement autour de 4 points. Nous allons voir dans un premier temps qu'est-ce que la PAOI, les défis auxquels est confrontée cette plateforme, les opportunités qui s'offrent à elle, et en quatrième position, nous allons donner quelques éléments de conclusion. Alors, next please. En termes de PAOI, PAOI c'est la plateforme des organisations africaines qui mettent en œuvre l'observation indépendante. L'observation indépendante qui est l'intervention d'un tiers outillé dans le cadre du suivi de l'application des lois en matière de gestion des ressources naturelles. En ce qui concerne la plateforme PAOI, son processus de mise en place a commencé en 2014, autour des années 2014, avec un projet UE-FAO-FLECT qui a permis de poser les bases de la création de cette plateforme. Ensuite, entre 2017 et 2020, à la faveur du projet CV4C mis en œuvre avec CIDT et d'autres organisations, la plateforme a pris vraiment son envol. Alors, c'est un cadre de réflexion et de travail pour mettre en place les stratégies qui vont aider à promouvoir le concept d'observation indépendante. Tout ce processus a été couronné par l'élaboration et la signature d'une charte par une douzaine d'organisations de la sous-région Afrique centrale, dont vous pouvez voir les logos de quelques-unes affichés à côté de la présentation. Alors, la plateforme en elle-même, quelle est sa raison d'être? La plateforme, next please, la plateforme a pour but d'accroître ou d'augmenter le nombre d'organisations qui interviennent dans la mise en œuvre de l'observation indépendante. Elle travaille aussi sur les questions de technique et d'approche, parce qu'il a été observé que les organisations qui mettaient en œuvre cette action qu'on appelle l'observation indépendante utilisaient des techniques parfois très variées et faisaient face à des critiques souvent acerbes sur les méthodes qu'elles utilisaient pour parvenir aux résultats. Pour terminer, c'est aussi un cadre qui permet de faire face, de créer un bloc par rapport aux potentielles adversités qui peuvent être menées vis-à-vis du concept d'OI. Vous avez là sur le slide un extrait de la charte qui est un peu, si on peut emprunter le langage des États, la constitution de cette plateforme qui met en place l'ensemble des règles auxquelles toutes les organisations consentent que les organisations consentent de respecter. La raison d'être de la plateforme PAOI, c'est d'harmoniser les approches. Tout à l'heure, j'évoquais la question des diversités entre les approches des différentes organisations. C'est d'avoir une ligne conductrice valable pour toutes les organisations qui mettent en œuvre le concept dans la sous-région, renforcer la crédibilité en se dotant d'outils qui permettent de donner des résultats qui ne font l'objet d'aucun doute ou d'aucune contestation. La plateforme a aussi pour but de promouvoir la collaboration et les synergies entre les organisations. Encadrer les organisations qui mettent en œuvre l'observation indépendante et être le cadre de référence pour les réflexions sur l'avenir de l'OI. Mais alors, pour parvenir à cet idéal, que d'obstacles il a fallu surmonter au fil du temps. Ce qui nous amène à rapidement évoquer quelques défis auxquels la plateforme a eu à faire face. Il y a d'abord le travail en ce qui concerne la construction d'une identité d'action commune, l'harmonisation des compréhensions, parce que vous avez plusieurs organisations que vous mettez ensemble autour d'un concept, d'une thématique. Chacune a déjà une approche qu'elle utilise. Et comment est-ce qu'on procède pour permettre à toutes ces organisations d'avoir une philosophie qui a un même fil conducteur, un fil conducteur identique. Il y a la création et le maintien de la dynamique et de la cohésion du groupe. Une fois que la plateforme a été créée, il faut lui donner des instruments et des outils qui vont permettre de garder la dynamique. Et ça a été une préoccupation très importante, surtout avec l'éclosion de la pandémie à Covid qui a bouleversé toutes les habitudes dans le monde. Bien entendu, comme l'illustre l'image que nous vous présentons, il y a le défi de la mobilisation des ressources pour faire fonctionner la plateforme et pour que les organisations puissent mettre en œuvre l'observation indépendante. Next. Le dernier défi ici, qui ouvre aussi des perspectives, c'est l'opérationnalisation du référentiel. Le référentiel, en fait, il s'agit d'un outil qui a été développé par l'ensemble des membres de la plateforme pour permettre d'évaluer la mise en œuvre de l'OI par les différentes organisations. Et le défi ici est non seulement de vulgariser cet outil, mais aussi de favoriser l'adoption de celui-ci par des organisations qui ne sont pas encore membres de la plateforme, mais qui sont intéressées par le concept, par l'utilisation du concept d'observation indépendante. Dans tout ce processus, il y a des acquis qui sont importants qu'il faut relever. Par exemple, les organisations ont pu adopter une définition consensuelle de l'OI, de l'observation indépendante, développer le référentiel, ça je l'ai déjà dit, et aussi élaborer une stratégie sous-régionale en ce qui concerne la mise en œuvre de l'OI. Pour ce qui est du référentiel en particulier, c'est un document qui traite de 6 principes, 15 critères et 39 indicateurs qui permettent de mesurer la robustesse des approches et le professionnalisme des organisations qui œuvrent dans la mise en œuvre de l'OI. Une fois qu'on a vu les défis auxquels est confrontée la plateforme, il faut dire que à côté des défis, il y a aussi les opportunités. Les opportunités parmi lesquelles on peut citer le regain d'intérêt pour l'OI. Rappelons que dans la sous-région du bassin du Congo, ça fait 20 ans que le processus est mis en œuvre et qu'il a des résultats probants. Et aujourd'hui, des réflexions sont en cours pour l'étendre à d'autres ressources naturelles, parce que pour l'instant, il était essentiellement sur les forêts, mais on est en train de travailler aux méthodes et outils qui peuvent permettre d'étendre l'application de ce concept-là à la couverture d'autres thématiques et d'autres ressources. Yes?
You have 2 minutes, yeah?
Yeah. En termes d'opportunités aussi, on a les projets transfrontaliers qui sont un catalyseur de la synergie. L'exemple du projet CV4C qui a permis d'accélérer le processus de la mise en œuvre de l'OI. Enfin, les contraintes qui existent sur le plan national sont aussi parfois des opportunités pour les organisations dans la mise en œuvre pour la dynamique du réseau, parce que ces contraintes au niveau national vont favoriser la mise ensemble des organisations pour pouvoir faire face aux pressions dont elles peuvent être l'objet de la part des pouvoirs nationaux et parfois même des contraintes qui peuvent les empêcher de mener à bien les missions qu'ils se sont données. À ce stade, nous pouvons constater que le processus en fait de mise en place et de fonctionnement de l'OI, de la plateforme PAOI, est un processus qui a pris du temps, certes, mais ce temps a été utile et bien valorisé pour permettre à ce que des bases solides soient posées pour la thématique de l'observation indépendante et favoriser aussi les synergies entre les organisations, parce que on sait dans la sous-région Afrique centrale, la culture de la mise en commun des organisations n'était pas suffisamment ancrée et particulièrement sur la question du suivi de la gestion des ressources naturelles. On avait observé qu'il y a un peu plus de compétition que de collaboration entre les organisations. Voilà un peu, en quelque sorte, très rapidement présenté les défis auxquels la plateforme PAOI est confrontée et quelques opportunités qui s'offrent à elle pour continuer à booster la mise en œuvre de l'OI dans le bassin du Congo. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Serge. I presume that Harleen is not going to speak.
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Serge. Thank you for emphasizing the need for an independent platform and how important that is in terms of monitoring, but how the challenge of coming together is also a concern in terms of getting to that situation where everybody agrees to the concept and how to do things. So thanks very much. Can we now move on to the next, and I think this is the last presentation. We're going back to Asia. Christian Purba is the Executive Director of the Independent Forest Monitoring Fund, which has established to support financially independent forest monitoring in Indonesia, I presume, Christian. And Christian used to work for Forest Watch in Indonesia, JPIC and Telapak. So I'll hand it over to you, Christian.
First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to join this webinar to share about our work, our experience to support the independent forest monitoring in Indonesia. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Christian Purba, but you call me Bob, and then I am from the Independent Forest Monitoring Fund. But my organization, I think, is part of my presentation. So I think we can move to. So this is just the background, the historical of illegal logging in Indonesia. But I want to explain briefly because my friend, my colleagues from JPIC in the second days already explained about this. I want to make the highlight about the SVLK. So if you look at the SVLK in 2003, started to develop by the multi-stakeholder process. It's quite a long journey, but I think we already have the one standard that adopted by the stakeholder. And then 2009, the SVLK as the mandatory scheme by operator, by the forest management units, and also industry all of Indonesia. So this is like the obligation by company. So the other achievement or other milestone is in 2016 when our government and AU government have signing the FLEGT license. So the context, independent forest monitoring and the IFM fund. So this is hoping you can clear about the IFM and IFM fund. So independent forest monitor is integral part of the SFLCA since this system operate implementing JSO and also community already engaged in this process. We monitor the compliance of the operator regarding the legality definition and also about the accreditation, verification, and all the until the licensing process. So the role of IFM, of independent forest monitoring, is more clear and fixed in the FLEGT and also in the SFLCA regulation number 8 2020. There's the ministry regulation to describe what our right, our mandate, and our obligation. Of course, the right, the IFM is first, we have the right to access to information. We have a right to location to do monitoring, and also this is related to security. And then the last is how to get the support funding. So IFM upload the integrity of SFLCA, provide some evidence to strengthen the system, and we are the key the key player in the system to improve the forest governance. But the dual limited fund, independent forest monitoring, facing the significant challenge to sustain their work, because one hand we focus to monitoring, to do our work, to do check and balance regarding the audit, and but the other hand we must carry out or looking for to do fundraising to continue our work. So based the reason, so there is some several discussion between independent forest monitors organization and donors to set up one organization that have mandate to fund management institutional to support the IFM activity. So this idea also reformed by joint expert meeting in 2017. There's one point is about the importance of establishing the sustainability funding models to support the IFM. So regarding the IFM fund, this is like the briefly of the profile established in 2017, and then we set up the organization through support from the UK aid, and then after that, over 3 years until now, we got funding from the FAO FLEGT to strengthening our capacity to raise the more funding for support the independent forest monitoring, and also to identification the strategic in finance. So this the IFM fund, and then the right side is like the structure of the IFM fund. So this is like the milestone when we set up and establish this organization. We started to set up the foundation, of course, and then design the SOP and to do the trial of grant making. And then until 3 years, we continue to strengthening the organization, and then we start to raise the funding. I mean, this is like the short-term financing because we got from the donors, and then also begin to do lobby work regarding the potential medium and long-term finance. So this right now, this position is after 3 years. So we right now focus on the how to making the fixed mechanism regarding the medium and long-term finance. And also we continue to extend our scope of monitoring and the grant making, and also how to identification or possibility to guard the endowment fund initiative. So IFM support and when we establish, there is 3 mandates that we got. First is facilitate funding support for independent monitors in the field. The second thing is facilitate to support the quality of independent forest monitoring, and also to improve the forest governance. So there is several activity that will we conduct to achieve the mandate is raise the fund, provide the grant, KPC building, develop the method of monitoring, campaign, and also publication. So when we set up or establish this organization, we are focused on SVLK implementation, of course. But you know, we not only focus on that, because we know there is quite many problems regarding the forest sector in Indonesia. So in process, we also support regarding monitoring of illegal logging, support monitoring of forest conversion, equality, and also regarding the conflict. So this kind of the issue is, we call it beyond of SVLK. So this is brief about the small grant performance and output. Until now, we support the independent monitors in the field to do consolidation, strategic planning, and then training, technical assistance, monitoring activity, media campaign, and promotion. And the result of the monitoring, some of that already contribute to strengthen the system. We're pushing the transparency of in the information in Indonesia, especially in the forestry sector, and then we strengthen the complaint handling and also the regulation improvement. And the others is some of our result monitoring to strengthen the law enforcement, disclosure of illegal logging or illegal trades, and then revoke of certification, and also disclose of the forest crime. And the third is through the result of monitoring is going to contribute to increase the scope and risk of the independent forest monitoring. The scope, not only the concession, but also the industry, and also the forest protection on conservation area. Some of our partners going to monitor that. And then the rates, we are start from the local NGOs, but right now is more broad. We also support the local community, indigenous people, organization, and women groups. And the right side is like the sum of our publication or the fact finding from our monitoring result. So this is like the strategic program in IFM Fund. First, we continue to strengthen our institutional. And then after that, we still continue right now to raise the funding to support the independent monitoring through the short-term financing strategy. And then we continue to improve our small grant mechanism. And then we facilitate, we engage the political dialogue to how to making the influence in how to strengthening our roles as the independent forest monitor, and then to going or focus to how to establish the medium long-term strategy, finance strategy. So regarding the medium and the long-term strategy in the finance, there is some resources or some options that we can we got fund to support our work. First is percentage of the fee legal flexibilizing, but I think to keep our independency, I think it is need to work or discuss together with our government and also the private to make the clear mechanism to use this funding, this source. And then until now, we already got a commitment from the CB Forum to allocate some of fund from the fee legal. And then the second thing is, I think because we are the part of the system, I think we have the right to get fund from the annual state budget. But I think this is only focused for the capacity. This is, I think, more or less can be maintains our independency. So the third is Environmental Fund Management Agency. In Indonesia is we have the Badan
Bob, you have 2 minutes, yeah, left.
Yep. So this is the third option that we going to looking to making the finance for the long or the medium strategic. So before that, I think we can still communicate or raise funding from the donors. I think that's the last my presentation. So thank you everyone. Terima kasih. Thank you Chrissy and thank you all.
Terima kasih banyak ya Bob. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the presenters. For the participants, please put your question and answers in questions in the question and answer box at the lower part of the link, and we will try to get to them. Let's start off with some questions. We're looking at the next decade, yeah, and we're looking at sustainability. And it appears that financing is something that is common and a concern and a challenge in terms of sustainability. My guess is a question to address to the two presenters from the Congo Basin, how they consider or look at the possibility of financial sustainability of the platform and the initiatives that are being done in terms of monitoring, forest monitoring. We all know that CSOs play a good big role, but how can we sustain this? So Corleen, you want to go first, and then I'll pass that on to Aurelian later on. Corleen?
Yeah, thank you, Chrissy. S'agissant de la durabilité des financements, comment est-ce qu'on peut procéder pour s'assurer que les observateurs indépendants sont toujours sur le terrain, qu'ils ont toujours assez de financements? Moi, je pense que pour chaque initiative qui démarre, je veux dire, comme des processus FLECT, RED, de carbone, etc., pour chaque processus, qu'il soit prévu un fonds en parallèle pour justement faire le suivi indépendant de ces processus-là. Je pense que ça pourrait aider, que ce soit le secteur privé, que ce soit les États. Si chaque acteur prévoit dans son budget pour l'activité principale, si je peux dire ainsi, qu'il veut mener, un fonds pour faire l'observation indépendante par les acteurs de la société civile, ça pourrait véritablement aider. Bon, peut-être, et l'autre chose aussi à laquelle je pense, c'est que lorsqu'on fait des actions d'observation indépendante, que ça ne se passe plus dans le cadre de projets spécifiques, que ce ne soit pas juste des appels à propositions, mais qu'on va plus dans le sens des programmes à long terme, ça permettrait vraiment que la société civile puisse se mouvoir facilement lorsqu'elle fait l'observation indépendante. Bon, pour ne pas être longue, je vais laisser Dr. Eliane, peut-être qu'il a d'autres idées.
Yeah, Christian, I think that was a great question. You know, following on from the presentation we've just had from Indonesia, and it's been an issue really at the core in terms of strengthening the impact of independent forest monitoring, and not only in the short term, because I think our experience in the Congo Basin is that a lot of the funding has been very short term. You know, particularly from the FAO Flex program, you know, this has been 12 months, 18 months projects. And this has often meant that NGOs cannot really develop, you know, long-term strategies, knowing exactly what's going to happen in 2 years. So they're constantly in this cycle of trying to fundraise and to get money. And so it really distracts them, you know, from focusing on what they have to do on the ground. And I think we've been fortunate in the past 4 years or so, particularly from the FCDO and from the EU, where they actually funded these large grants. You know, in the Congo Basin, we had the Citizen Voices for Change, and then the particular Asia-Pacific project, where I think for the first time really that the NGOs that are involved in different forest monitoring, the key ones, had, you know, sustained funding for a period of 4 years, and so they could really focus on working on their tools, on the techniques, and actually going to the field to do work. For me, I think that the model that's been developed in Indonesia is really a model that should really be explored and, let me say, copied in the Congo Basin. Because I think that in the Congo Basin now, I think there's the CAFI initiative, for example, which is also a basket fund, you know, particularly looking at how governments are trying to address issues around forest deforestation and forest degradation. And in my view, you know, these types of basket funds, because at the end of the day, independent forest monitoring, I argue strongly that it's a public good. You know, these organizations are providing and improving transparency in the forest sector. And so they should be considered in their role of providing this service, generating information. And as you may know, Christy, in many countries, you know, without this information from these NGOs, you don't have any information about what's happening in the forest sector from government side. So we think that really is a public good. And in that way, we think that the basket fund mechanism, you know, could actually support, you know, provide this long-term visibility in terms of independent forest monitoring, and also to keep their independence, as Christian actually said. And I think it was interesting also, you know, understanding that because there are challenges with the FLEC process in the Congo Basin, we might not reach the level of having FLEC licenses in the Congo Basin, which means that the possibility of getting funding from such a system might not be viable. But maybe a basket fund mechanism with, you know, strengthening the ability of these NGOs to mobilize these resources could actually be a way forward. And I think I'm already saying, and we've been reflecting this CIDT, that definitely we'll have to explore how to draw lessons from the Indonesian example and to try and replicate this in other regions. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Aurelian. So maybe just for the organizers of the conference to see if they can actually organize a side event informally on financing outside of this session might be a recommendation to the conference. And I'm presuming Bryna and Christian, you're willing to share your lessons. Bob, you can just put a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you're willing to share in that small event that maybe could be organized by the organizers outside of this conference. Yeah. Okay. So my next question is that we have been inundated with this COVID-19, and apparently, no, it's not going to go away tomorrow. And it appears that it is going to stay with us for a few more years. So my question is to Anna and Bob. How do you think this affects, you know, the work in Indonesia and in Malaysia in terms of moving forward with, you know, engaging with the government, monitoring on the ground? How is this affected, and how do we see this affecting the work that we do going forward in the next decade?
I will respond the Krishi question is regarding the challenging in the pandemic COVID. Right now, in independent forest monitoring in Indonesia already facing the big challenge, not only to do our mandate, but also how we can continue to move in the field in the pandemic. So at least there is any needed to find out the different method to monitoring. So based on our discussion with the among independent monitors in Indonesia, I think the best way we can do with the virtual monitoring. It means how to mix the high-tech technology and also our network. So this can be more or less effective in the pandemic. So not only directly going to the field, but I think we can do with the first, we analyze about the public summary of the audit. And then after that, we can combine with the high tech to checking to verify the potential of the violence. After that, we can go into that. So I think that the idea, our idea to respond the pandemic right now.
Thanks, thanks, Bob. And I assume you're okay to share with our colleagues from the Congo Basin the lessons from the Indonesian financing, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anna, you want to respond briefly?
Yes. Yeah, this pandemic is quite challenging. We can't really monitor everything on the ground. Even, go to the field also being restricted. I can say that, we have been very limited movement. We can't go to the forest or even the village to get information or even collect data or get more information. With that, we need more, what we say, community involvement. We need the villagers or orang asli to help to guard the forest together, to co-manage the area with us. And we need more network, improve the network. Then we can get the nearby people to help us to pay attention. Despite of having high tech, maybe we can use drone and other things to monitor the forest cover and where they have illegal logging and where they have, anything abuse or whatever. So we need to get the local communities to help in co-managing the areas. And that is another option. Besides that, we can still always have richer training or online awareness to the communities and to those, stay nearby the forest. We might encourage through the NGO, we encourage more public awareness campaign through richer online. So people are more aware of these matters and pay attention of anything that they're being like a watchdog and keep informed to the government or to the NGO that what is happening in the surrounding. It is another option. We need to really cooperate amongst, everyone, among the community, the NGO, the private sectors, and the government. Whatever they found out, please, gather the information and link or supply or inform the government or the authorities. So with this type of cooperation, I think we can reduce anything that we use we can monitor, we can do it on the ground, it can be reduced, and with the cooperation, we can really improve for forest monitoring and be more independent. It is not solely depends on government or authorities. It depends on everyone's cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. This emphasizes the need to work together, yeah? That we cannot do it alone. So Bryna, question for you in the box in terms of the financing, how you engage with communities, but also I guess, how do you scale up such initiatives? because it's, as we have seen, it's a common concern for sustainability.
Yeah, so I think how the communities are engaged is really dependent on the type of strategy that we're taking. That's sort of an obvious statement. But for example, when we're working with farmers, you know, we and our partners on the ground can't tell farmers what to do. What we can do is offer opportunities to those farmers. So for example, we can offer training, we can offer opportunities to get higher prices for their goods if they agree to certain conditions. It's also really important that we explain and build capacity of the farmers to understand their choices in these you know, new enterprises, so they don't have to take part. But we've found that when farmers have the opportunity to improve their production and improve their prices, they often are very interested to do that. But they often wouldn't do that if we weren't there to help them along and to create the structure to make it happen. So, you know, when we're working with farmers, I think it's a very collaborative process. And when we work on RED, there's a whole process that we undertake, or that we, you know, in some cases are undertaking now, to work with communities to help them understand their choices, help them understand the implications, the responsibilities, the benefits, and give them the right to take part or not take part in the process. So it really depends on the landscape, how the communities are involved. But all of these depend on community involvement. We can't develop enterprises or a RED project if the communities are not interested or don't want to participate. It just won't work. So we have to make sure that we are working closely with them. I forget the second part of your question, Christy. Sorry. Oh, scaling up. Yeah. So yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think the thing is that what we've found is that once you can build something small, if you can show that it works, then other people and other groups want to take part. So the focus really needs to be on strengthening the small enterprise first and make sure that is really working, and then you can grow and then you can offer that. So I think the example that WCS has built in with ibis rice is a really great example. It took them a long time to develop that business and develop a business model that was sustainable in and of itself. But now that it's working, they're able to expand and work with other NGOs such as our teams to expand it into other areas. But if they had tried to say, oh, we're going to cover all rice farms in Cambodia from the beginning, it just never would have worked. So strengthening the piece that you are working on until it's actually really working, and then kind of offering that out and looking at scaling up, I think is really the way to go. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I think there are key things that we have covered today. The last one I think is very apt. I think small is beautiful, and it's something to start with for any endeavor. I think we also said that, you know, commitment by CSOs and the public and the government even is very important, as well as the donors and supporters of these initiatives. We need to engage people. We need to engage as many potential partners as possible. This is not a responsibility or something that one sector or one group of people can undertake successfully. So I think that's an acknowledgement that collaboration and cooperation is crucial to sustain efforts at effective forest governance. So thank you everyone for keeping to time and also sharing your insights and thoughts to this session. And thank you to the participants for fielding the questions, critical questions to respond to. So I'll hand it over to Richard now. And by the way, I am Christy Nozawa. I'm the Executive Director of Samdana Institute, a regional institute. We have offices in Bogor and the Philippines. And we also support Malaysia. And I'm a former BirdLife fan, or I am still a BirdLife fan. So thanks very much. I hand it over to Richard now.
Terima kasih, Christy. Thank you very much That was an excellent session. Some useful and interesting discussions took place.